Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning at the French Institute of International Relations for this conference on the EU-India Technological Partnership. I add also that we have a large number of participants following us online. So thank you to all our online participants to join us this morning. So today we are very fortunate to bring together high-level experts and decision makers who not only follow the developments on emerging technologies very closely, but also have been involved directly or indirectly in this growing rapprochement between EU and India. And I must say, for observers like me, the acceleration of the EU-India partnership in recent years is quite impressive. Just looking at the agenda of official visits over the past months, it's clear that something significant is taking place, at least at the political level. So I will mention the India-EU summit in Delhi in January with the announcement of a free trade agreement between EU and India. Also, the frequency of high-level bilateral visits, including Chancellor Friedrich Merz's visit in January in Delhi, followed by President Macron's state visit to Mumbai and Delhi, during which he also took part in the AI Impact Summit. And more recently, the participation of the President of Finland as guest of honor for the Resina dialogue in Delhi as well. So India's engagement with Europe is also deepening and expanding rapidly. Recently, Italy, Greece, Poland have been elevated to the status of strategic partners for India. It was a distinction that was for nearly 2 decades reserved for France and Germany. But beyond trade, some of our highest expectations and uncertainties lie in our collaboration on emerging technologies. So the EU-India strategic agenda towards 2030, which was also released on the occasion of the summit in January, outlines our shared ambition for the coming years. And it reflects a stronger commitment compared to previous efforts in technology and innovation cooperation. So it covers many areas, such as digital technologies, AI, semiconductors, clean technologies, space technologies, and biotechnologies as well. So this morning, we'll look at what is driving this closer tech cooperation, the geopolitical and structural factors at play, what can realistically be achieved together, and also the limits that we need to keep in mind. To discuss this complex and exciting topic, I'm very pleased to welcome our 4 eminent panelists, and I would like again to thank them for being with us today. So Ambassador Clara Chapaz, you serve as France Ambassador for Digital Affairs and Artificial Intelligence. Previously, you were French Secretary of State for AI and Digital Affairs after leading the French Tech Mission and gaining experience in both the private and the public sector. Suman Beri, thank you for joining us online. Suman, namaste, can you hear us?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good
I should mention first that you will need to leave us by 11:30, so we'll make sure that we'll capture your insights before then. Suman Beri, you're the Vice Chairperson of Niti Aayog, India's premier policy think tank, chaired by the Prime Minister of India, and you hold the rank of a cabinet minister. So you're an economist and policy advisor, and you previously held positions at the World Bank, in the private sector, and in think tank. You hold degrees from Princeton University and the University of Oxford. Gabriele Bertoli, so you're Deputy Head of the Unit for Policy Outreach and International Affairs at the DG Connect. I don't know, I have to go through the acronym, so it's a...
I don't even know it myself.
A Directorate General for Communications Networks, Content and Technology at the European Commission. So your work supports the EU external digital agenda, including building international cooperation on emerging technologies. And Trisha Ray, you made a long journey to be with us this morning, coming all your way from Washington, and thank you again for that. So you're Associate Director and Resident Fellow at the Atlantic Council Geotech Center, where you lead research on the geopolitical and security dimension of emerging technologies, such as AI, data governance, digital policy. And previously, you were Deputy Director at the ORF, the Observer Research Foundation, which is India's leading think tank on international relations. So I think we can now open our discussion. And Ambassador Chapaz, I will start with you, as you were part of the official delegation accompanying President Macron to the AI Impact Summit in Delhi in February. In an article, in an interview you gave just before going to India, you talk about a third technological way beyond China and the US. So could you share your impressions from the summit and tell us whether France and India found common ground in this third way? Where do our perspectives align or differ? And since you were also part of the official bilateral visit, I have also a question on France-India cooperation. Could you highlight some of the concrete bilateral initiatives that have been launched during the visit, so it was 1 month ago, to give us maybe a sense of what is happening on the ground?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, it was a very important moment for France and India relationship. As you might have recalled, the relationship was elevated to special global strategic partnership, which is a lot of diplomatic words, but to say is that it's actually a very big deal because France is one of the first country to elevate its relationship, European country to elevate its relationship to this level with India. And that's a result of a very intense engagement when it comes to strengthening our diplomatic ties with India, and obviously also the result of shared convictions that are, shared among different sectors, but in particular when it comes to innovation and tech, and that's why it was also important to be there during the AI Summit, are very valid. You might recall that when we hosted the AI Summit in Paris, the AI Action Summit last year, India was actually invited to co-chair the summit. And so as a way kind of back, the fact that we had this official bilateral visit during the summit that they were hosting in Delhi is a very strong sign on how much we're aligned into the vision when it comes to building AI. And you're right, I think the first alignment is on the necessity for like-minded partners to come together when it comes to building this technology, because we talk a lot about digital sovereignty, but no country can do sovereignty alone. It's not about closing doors and just saying, oh, we're going to build our digital sovereignty and security and just do like French companies with French components. Obviously, that doesn't really make any sense, but it's about seeing what are the partners who in the value chain of AI have first similar values, engagement, willingness to build together and can kind of build up on each other to be much stronger as an alternative between, on the one hand, the big tech players from the US and on the other end, the tech players from China. And this is something that India has completely shared as an ambition for quite some time now. And that was definitely worked towards for the summit and the bilateral visit. And what does that mean concretely? Because you asked concretely, like, what are some of the steps we took during the visit? It means first and foremost, talents. Because as President Emmanuel Macron stated it during the visit, the question is not anymore whether India innovates. It's who innovates with India. Because India is probably one of the most innovative country in the world nowadays. And to innovate together, we had a conversation with some students that had been studied in France and in India and were launching their companies in both countries. They were the ones saying that the stronger collaboration, cultural experience comes from their own cultural experience of being able to be these human bridges between the two countries. And it was very strong to hear them share that, because it was not prompted, but when we asked them, like, what can we do to reinforce our relationship, our partnerships, and in the objective to build this third way together. So like that starts with us, the talents. So we, during the visit, reinforced the partnerships between our universities. We had like 30 heads of universities from France coming with us, building and signing partnerships with Indian universities on AI in different fields, health, energy, like there's so many different expertise. And also like the objective to have 30,000 students, Indian students come to France was set with the ability to facilitate those exchanges, but with the importance as well that it goes both ways, also to promote the ability for French students to come to India. It's the first, I think, deliverable that was kind of the basics of what we could do, because if we don't have these talents and knowledge sharing, we can't do much. And then there was a lot of different projects unveiled, for example, a center on AI and health that was built at AIMS, which is one of the biggest hospitals in Delhi, where our universities and Delhi's hospital kind of came together to join expertise on what AI can bring to health. This is also something that is very concrete because it's under the leadership of the two countries with scientific expertise from the two countries, and that definitely can help us advance the technology. A lot of companies that were also part of the delegation came on board to sign agreements with Indian partners, can be in healthcare. For example, H company worked on agreements with a bunch of different hospitals while they were along the defense sector. So on all the different fields, this visit was also very concretely an opportunity for scientists, entrepreneurs, head of companies to kind of see how we can build again together, complement each other on such an important topic that is AI, where it's probably not going to be like a one country race, and it's a race that we need to win together.
Thank you so much for providing such a comprehensive feedback on your visit in India. And maybe Trisha, I'd like to hear your reaction on that, because you were also you participate at the AI Impact Summit in Delhi. So could you share also maybe your thoughts on the outcomes of the summit, and maybe where do you see also a potential cooperation between the EU and India? Do you think this third way is credible in a landscape that is largely dominated by China and the US?
So thank you for that question, and of course for the invitation to IFRI. It's my third time now. And between the first time, which was 2022, and now I've also seen the EU-India technology partnership really evolve from promising but undercommitted, I'd say, towards credible and institutionally anchored. And so, of course, in addition to the FTA that was finally signed between EU and India earlier this year, last year, the second iteration of the EU-India Trade and Tech Council also had their meeting, along with some real commitments on cooperation between India AI and the EU AI office, as well as a startup partnership between the two, and the establishment of innovation hubs, and even involving India in Horizon Europe. So quite a few commitments coming out of that as well. I'd also like to highlight that there were commitments made towards interoperability between India and the EU on digital public infrastructure, which is also key to AI. Supercomputing, really exciting to see. And also 6G, which I feel like is an underexplored aspect of that AI infrastructure piece, because currently the consensus is that AI workloads are going to be moving towards on-device computing. And so managing that dynamic inference workload between devices and the network itself, 6G is a very important element of that. And I'm happy to explain that in detail as well. So a lot that's happened in that partnership. On the second part of your question, which is the third way, but there's no doubt that India and the EU have a strong value proposition when it comes to governance norms. It remains to be seen how the EU AI Act will be played out. There's been some issues with implementation and the timeline for that. But that is because the technology is fast moving, and I still congratulate the EU for putting these rules on paper. It is also credible in part because of the focus on real value for people. And this was a message of the AI Impact Summit as well. There was a focus on use cases because both the countries of Europe as well as India can't afford to pour billions in investment and capital into frontier model development, which leads nowhere, which is what US companies are currently competing to do. They have cutting edge models, but there's still questions about return on investment on whether these cutting edge models are actually useful for people. The problem in that third way piece remains execution. And that's because EU and India are still largely reliant on US suppliers when it comes to most AI infrastructure, including cloud infrastructure, as well as chips. And so on that front, it was heartening to see that the EU-India agreements signed this year do have a large focus on AI infrastructure. It's going to be a long game. It requires patient capital as well as patience generally on both sides. So it remains to be seen how that will play out. The second element of third way is making that joint EU-India proposition compelling to other countries, say in Southeast Asia, Latin America, developing Africa. And that is the portion that still remains under worked on, right? Because that base of that EU-India partnership is still being built. But as that's being built, it's important to start doing that messaging to other countries as well.
Thank you so much, Trisha. Maybe I turn to Suman Berry. Could you start by explaining what Niti Aayog is and what your role is in advising the Indian government? And since you provide policy advice as well, we'd like to ask, what does India expect from the EU in terms of technological cooperation? And according to you, which sectors are the most promising and the most important for India? But also conversely, what can India can also offer to the EU in this area?
Thank you, Sylvie, and thank you for inviting me. I am pleased to be associated with IFRI, and I also want to thank Minister Shapas for agreeing to the change in time so we could overlap together. So let me just start a little bit with Niti Aayog and explain the name because that will tell you a lot. So Aayog in Hindi and Sanskrit is commission. Niti in again, Hindi and Sanskrit is policy. So we are now a policy commission, but Niti is typically capitalized in English because it is also an acronym for the National Institution for Transforming India. We sit in the same building that housed India's Planning Commission. The Planning Commission was set up by India's first post-independence Prime Minister, Pandit Nehru, in 1951. And it continued as a planning commission with 5-year plans all the way until Prime Minister Modi's selection as India's Prime Minister in 2014. And one of his first acts, and when I had my job interview with him, he told me this was after consultation with Dr. Manmohan Singh, his predecessor. He determined that a post-liberalization India did not need a planning commission. And so our present format has been conceived of by the Prime Minister, and we have been shaped by the fact that since 2014, Prime Minister Modi has been India's Prime Minister now in his third term. Let me add that India is a federal country, and both the Planning Commission and now Niti Aayog have roles to play with the union government, headed by Prime Minister Modi, but both institutions also have important roles of an advisory kind with India's 30 plus jurisdictions. And as I had the opportunity to work for Shell and then to be a non-resident fellow of Bruegel, I often think of India as a federation, much like many of you would think of EU member states. After all, our largest member state in terms of population is about 250, 260 million. And in terms of expanse, our second or third largest state, Maharashtra, I believe, is about the same size as Germany. And so I do want, as our relationship deepens, that those of you on the European side and the member state side appreciate that there are these different layers to India. Now, looking a little bit ahead, and I will deal with the EU as an entity, but I will also deal with member states since we have the privilege of having a French minister on the panel. Let me start maybe at the member state level and then move on to the EU level, because there are competences at both levels. I do think that we must all learn from both the time horizon and the end point, at least before the second Trump administration, of what happened between Indian talent and the US, between the liberalization of immigration in 1965 and 2025. So over those 60 years or 59 years, essentially India and Indian talent, often from our institutes of technology, became absolutely integral to product development, innovation in areas such as Silicon Valley, and of course in other fields as well. The heads of both Google and Microsoft, as you know, are Indian origin entrepreneurs. And so I hope this will not be considered a frightening prospect by member states and by EU and by the EU. All I would say is that we shouldn't only think about government to government. We should think about people to people. And I think both the EU strategic partnership and the even more elevated French partnership, which was ably presented by you, Sylvia, in your opening comments, these should be seen as initial moves towards that kind of depth of familiarity and ease of participation. And I dare say that France, again, before the Trump administration, had similar associations with US entities and US individuals. So that's at the country member state level. At the EU level, I think we've heard about specific technologies, and I'm a development economist. I'm not really an expert on the technologies, although I will speak to a couple of dimensions coming out of the AI Impact Summit. But I was very, impressed that what might be on the table is for India to become a member of Horizon Europe. I know from my association with the UK how much they feel deprived at not having been for a while included in Horizon Europe. So that is a competency at the EU level. We've had a visit here in my office where I'm speaking from of DG Grow from the Commission, who has talked about supply chains and trusted partnerships. So these are competencies at the EU level. But let me just conclude with a couple of reflections on the AI Impact Summit and the partnership between and the handover from the AI Summit to the AI Impact Summit, and also mention that France holds the G7 chair as well, and so this year, and so I think Prime Minister Modi has been invited and is likely to participate. So for me, as an attendee and a contributor to the AI Impact Summit, I think two or three dimensions are worth mentioning. One is that the term impact was added, and those of you who were able to attend would see that India put its money where its mouth is. So for India, India is optimistic about AI. Yes, we know that there are risks, but we see AI as a technology accelerator. I think our leading technologist, Nandan Nilekani, pointed out that really for India, the challenge is AI diffusion, not particularly to be at the frontier for reasons of expense, but also let's leave that for others. I think the point that was raised about dependence on, if you like, external platforms is a genuine one, and we are dependent on those platforms. Our reaction or our response to that has actually been to create this large developer community. So all the platforms wish to be here for their own reasons. And just to add that since France and the rest of the EU, but particularly France, has very strong links with the global South, how our partnerships can bring AI and AI applications to certainly sub-Saharan Africa, the global South. These are other dimensions of the partnership that we should be looking to over a 10 or 15-year horizon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Back to you.
Thank you so much for bringing the Indian perspective. Maybe I will let Gabriele react, but before that, Ambassador Chapaz, as we mentioned, this question of human connections that are very important to make the political ambition materialize. How can we make this happen? Because you talk about a new partnership between universities. So how can we make sure that we increase these human ties you were mentioning?
Thank you for sharing about the summit. Yeah, I mean, I touched on it just before. I think for us, and it's interesting what you said about the 60 years of talent exchange with the US. Definitely we see an opportunity is a word in the current global context that is a bit difficult to pronounce, but with the borders being more fragmented than before, there is definitely a willingness, I would say, to collaborate. And a lot of the scientific exchanges that we built during the summit or coming up to the summit are also, I hope, a strong signal to say that we're open to do more together. Because there are in this context, global context, countries that are more of the tendency to like close their borders, but we actually want to open it to our allies to do more together. And that's why we have this objective of 30,000 students. And that's why in the delegation of universities, you had university business schools, scientific schools, private schools, public schools. I mean, everyone is kind of sending the same message to say, okay, how do we build those human relationship from the get-go with students so that later on you will have much more ability to contribute and build together. And I think, because I forgot to mention that earlier, part of the human relationship also is based on the fact we share similar values. As you just rightly said, the summit moved from action to impact with the idea that AI is an opportunity, which when the first AI summit happened was probably a little bit buried because the summit was called the AI Safety Summit back then and focused more on like the risks of this technology. We do think that building the relationship with our countries is very important to make sure that the impact of this technology benefit like everyone and benefit the common good, which is something that we've been working on together. And to take some other concrete examples of what happened during the summit and during the bilateral visit, which I think give a strong signal into the ability to deliver on that agenda, is on protecting children. This is something that our president has been very engaged on, especially the impact of social networks, AI technologies on the younger generation. Prime Minister Modi also shared during the visit that he was going to engage into looking at laws forbidding access to social networks below a certain age, which is something that is very important because it's a topic that we, as we host the G7 presidency, as you just said, we want to really bring forward because we think we need a global movement to really make a difference with the children's life, because this is not just a topic of national interest, it's a topic of setting norms globally. On multilingualism, this is also something that Prime Minister Modi has taken very strongly during the summit. He made the different companies sign an agreement on how they're going to train their models on the different languages of India. And this is also something we've been pushing for a lot when we hosted the summit with back in France the year before, and that we will also push for during the G7 presidency. Definitely hoping that Prime Minister Modi will be here, because we do share the perspective with India that this technology to serve the vast majority and variety of people in the world cannot just be trained in English, because it carries with itself such impact on our ability to understand different cultures and values. And that's something both countries are very committed to. And then the last piece of this agenda is the impact that technology has on society overall, on labor, on usages. So part of also the declaration that was signed by the companies is on the transparency of how does this technology work, which is very important for our citizens to understand if they want to, contribute, if we want to contribute having a public debate, democratic debate that is going to be not biased by technologies and their algorithm and such, but also just usage of how this technology is being used by citizens is something that Prime Minister Modi has pushed for a lot during the summit, that we're happy to continue working on with this G7 presidency, because our ability to work together with India to understand like how AI is transforming 1.4 billion people daily life, and what we can learn and share from each other on how it transformed the life of our citizens, we think is one of the probably most important challenge we're facing. So it's not about building technology together only, it's about doing that. It's very important, and that comes with building joint talent and joint knowledge and scientific expertise, but it's also about shaping where we want the technology to go together, and how do we want the technology to be powerful, to have the capacity firsthand together and not being dependent on the others, but also to bring it to a place where it does represent who we want to be when it comes to diversity, inclusivity, protecting most vulnerable people, children, is something that can only work if we do it together. And that's definitely based on our strong human relationship, I think.
Thank you so much for providing all those details on the common agenda. I'm now turning to Gabriele. Maybe could you explain first how you've been involved in this growing EU-India rapprochement? I know you're involved in the Trade and Technology Council that was launched in 2023 to strengthen our cooperation in technology. So maybe could you tell us what the TTC actually does in practice? And also building on Mr. Berry's answer, how do you see the TTC helping to meet those expectations?
Thank you very much, Silvia. Good morning and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's also a pleasure for once to be talking about a partnership that works and works well. 2022, we have Prime Minister Modi and President von der Leyen meeting and deciding to launch the Trade and Technology Council, Silvia, as you just mentioned, which is a format where you have an intersection of digital, trade, and research. It's run at the highest political level, but it has a strong ministerial drive on all these aspects. very humbly, here we are coordinating the first working group, which is the one on digital, and that's the one that we're coordinating from DigiConnect, and our partner in India is primarily METI, so the correspondent of the Digital and Technology Ministry in India. So we have that in 22. 23, first meeting of the TTC. 25, we have the whole commission, the whole College of Commissioners going to India to meet the Indian government, and in parallel we have the second meeting of the TTC. 26, EU-India Summit. Then the AI Impact Summit. I mean, it has been really a build-up of events at the highest political level. At the same time, a lot of work has happened in the coulisses, as you say here, in the behind the doors, at technical level, where, and I would like to come to what Suman said, we are trying to go away from a purely government-to-government approach, talking about regulation, which remains important, but we would also like to involve more and more, as the ambassador mentioned, also the people, but also the companies. We have EU companies that are top-notch in technology and are very much compatible and can work very well with Indian companies and Indian talent. So we would like really to drive as much as possible a government-to-government, but also business-to-business cooperation in terms of technology. What is happening concretely? I would say maybe four main strands. Tricia, you also mentioned some of them. The first is the largest AI ecosystem. We're working very much on large language models, including on having not just English being the main language, but also any other language being addressed in this context. We have very strong cooperation between our AI office and the Indian AI Safety Institute and the Indian AI Mission. HPC, so high performance computing, we open our doors to cooperation with the Indian partners. So are the Indian partners doing with us. And then there's a increasingly important work on semiconductors, cooperation on the semiconductor value chain. We have an MOU on that. We are trying to implement it. It's extremely important for the diversification of our tech value chains. Second strand, I think, is also very well mentioned already, is digital public infrastructure. I mean, we have a system in India that is one of the most powerful in the world. In Europe, we have the digital wallet. We are building a business wallet also, so from citizens going all the way to the businesses. We want these systems to be technically interoperable, and we want to go towards mutual recognition of, for example, EU e-signatures and Indian e-signatures. And also we are launching pilot project, which was also mentioned, I think, by you, Tricia, in third countries. So we want to offer these solutions to African countries, Southeast Asian countries, together with India. Third strand is the big connectivity, cybersecurity. 6G was also mentioned. The idea that we work together on standards specifically, and that we work together on making sure that especially 5G, 6G networks are cyber secure. And in that respect, we very much value the fact that trusted vendors are behind those digital solutions. Finally, I think the fourth, and that was mentioned very much by the ambassador, and just to say that I think what the member states are doing goes, especially France, go precisely in the same directions as what we are doing, at different level, with different capacity, with different competencies, with different prerogatives. But I feel that it's very much complementary and very much going to the same direction. So on talents, what we have established just this year is a legal gateway office in India, where Indian ICT talent, so we're starting with the digital sector, can get advice and support to come over to Europe and work in our companies and in our research institutions. At the same time, and I see what the ambassador meant, this has to be both ways. It's obviously we are willing to have Indian talents. Hopefully that we could develop an ecosystem that is similar as the Silicon Valley one with those talents. But at the same time, this cannot be just a brain drain. It has to be an exchange between our universities, our companies, Indian universities, and Indian companies. So what is coming next? We don't have a date yet, but we are negotiating on a date with our Indian counterparts to have the next Trade and Technology Council at ministerial level happening already in the first half of this year, where we're going to be taking stock of all these strands of work and hopefully building even more. And again, with an idea that 3-4 years ago, we started on a regulatory exchange basis, and now we want to move on working together, investments, mutual recognition basis, making our businesses at the core of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to follow up on this idea of EU and India working together with third countries, because it has also been mentioned by other panelists. And Suman, I'm turning to you again. I know you have to leave soon, but you mentioned this link towards the global south. And in an article you wrote, you said India can serve as a bridge between advanced economies and the global south. So I'd like to understand, according to you, if India can play this role of a bridge between the EU and global south, and if so, what might a concrete cooperation agenda on tech look like?
Thanks, Ursula. I had earlier put my hand up because I also had forgotten one key dimension, and with the minister here, this could be at the member state level to begin with before going up to the EU level, and maybe it's also covered by Horizon. So I should mention that while Niti Aayog has been in existence since Prime Minister Modi took office as Prime Minister in 2014, I'm the third vice chairman. Each time the Prime Minister has chosen an economist. And what I did want to put on the table is that while we're thinking about STEM, tech, and all of that, at the end of the day, there is talent in India. We have been very much impacted by what I might call the Anglo-Saxon tradition in the social sciences. But the contribution of Europe to the social sciences is just as significant. Within Paris, you have the Paris School. And so I just wanted, in the presence of the minister, to say that we should not ignore, as it were, the social sciences, in addition to what may come up more spontaneously in the physical and natural sciences. But your question was a somewhat different one, which is, how could India be a bridge? So I would say it's not, for us, a very well established proof of concept, unlike the Chinese, who have had the Belt and Road mechanism for dealing particularly with Africa. It may be controversial, but if you like, the rails at a country level have been laid by the Chinese there. As I've thought about this, the Japanese, incidentally, have also been interested in using India as a platform for projecting some of their commercial activity in Africa. But while there was some talk of there being a connectivity link, that hasn't gone very far. So what I would build on are some of the following. First, we have been fairly successful in using our digital public infrastructure as a model for engaging with certain countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But I think equally important, and of course you have this also to offer, is that our private sector, much more than our official sector, has been involved in both East and Anglophone West Africa through a diaspora, through investment. And so I have reason to think that they represent, the original diaspora does represent, as it were, a trusted source of advice and entrepreneurship, but also in an area like telecom, one of our leading telecom firms, Bharti Airtel, has been successful in setting up an African subsidiary. So where the digital public infrastructure led, it does seem to me that joint cooperation on the various impact dimensions that were discussed at the AI Impact Summit could follow. And I'm thinking particularly of what India is doing in the so-called agri-stack, creating a digital and increasingly AI sort of powered a way of delivering very accessible advice to farmers on climatic conditions, on the dosage of fertilizers, etc. What this would actually mean for the partnership for Europe, I'm not close enough to say. That's for others to figure out. But I think those are the ways in which India wants to make more concrete its role as a friend of the global South. Let me just leave it at that. And one other point that already was brought up by Gabriele, which is this crucial business of being at the table when standards are being evolved, I think is something that perhaps could feature in the next meeting of the TTC. Which standards matter to India, which standards matter to our partnership. I think that is another very useful dimension because you people have the experience and the clout. For us, this is a new but important game.
Thank you so much, Sumant, for putting all these very interesting ideas on the table. And I think you have to leave soon, so thank you.
I have 10 minutes more, yes.
10 minutes more. Okay, perfect. Perfect. So maybe I'm turning to Trisha. Since you just came from Washington, there was a major agreement in tech cooperation between India and the US, the ICET, India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology, which I think India was very happy with and want to also replicate with other countries. So my first question is this partnership with the US still active under the Trump 2 administration? And do you think Europe can have the same level of ambition with the TTC as the US has with the ICET?
Before I answer that question, I just wanted to quickly come back to the point on people-to-people exchanges. So the EU and India did sign a comprehensive framework for cooperation on mobility earlier this year in January, I believe. And there are quite a few, it was pretty comprehensive. It has very detailed points on what exactly needs to be fixed on both sides. I was very excited to see that digitalization of the Schengen application process is a part, because each time I apply for a Schengen visa, I have to submit a stack of documents this thick. It is quite onerous. So it was quite exciting to see that. And then I'd also like to point out that Indian people are the single largest foreign recipients of the EU blue card as well. It's still a fraction of, say, the number of Indians who go to the US for work visas. It's about 10 to 20,000 each year. It was on the lower end last year. It's 5% of the numbers that the US issues. So there's still something to be done there. And now back to your question on ISET. So ISET was rebranded, of course. There was a lot of early momentum when the second Trump administration came into power in that India-US partnership. And one of these was the rebranding of ISET to what was called Trust. transforming the relationship using strategic technology. India and the US do share a love for good acronyms as well. Ironically, though, trust, not the acronym, but the concept, has been a challenge in the US-India relationship since then. And so the partnership itself hasn't quite materialized into the regularity that was present with ISET, but that may change. There are more high-level visits now between the US and India. I think the Trump administration has realized that they've ignored that partnership for too long. And so I would say that ISET/Trust does present a good model for the TTC in that it was quite ambitious. The involvement of the national security councils from both sides is also what helped elevate it and get that buy-in from the government. It was the who part, like who was involved on both sides. And then it had advanced quite a bit in terms of laying out an AI infrastructure roadmap, for example, with specific stipulations on market access, on industry commitments, and infrastructure build out as well. The other thing that the US has done well over the last few years is a model of understanding on the relationship with Russia. Even though earlier this year, there was that stipulation from the Trump administration that India cease all imports of Russian oil. That has been paused given the supply shocks happening due to the war with Iran. So there is still that understanding that India can't cut its reliance on Russia overnight, that there has to be this kind of graduated model of reducing dependence as well. And so there's this understanding of like sovereign plus for India to achieve full sovereignty is in the US's interest, but there needs to be a roadmap to get there.
Thank you. And I'd like to continue on geopolitical dynamics. Maybe, Gabriele, looking at the acceleration of the EU-India partnership, of course, we can't help seeing a response also to the Donald Trump second administration. But the rapprochement actually predates Trump's re-election, since the discussion on the FTA starting reopened in 2022. And at the time, there was a lot of talk about a common concern among Europeans and Indians regarding the dependence on China. So maybe could you explain to which extent those geopolitical factors, so the Trump factor and the common China concern, are driven our ties closer?
Thank you, Silvia. You're putting the big guys on the table now. But first, I would claim world leadership on acronyms. I'm sorry, US, sorry, India. I think on that, we are really the champions. So, on your question, Silvia, well, we choose the countries with whom we want to work with more in depth on digital and technology based on two main criteria: how large they are, how big they are, and how tech advanced they are on the one hand, and how aligned to our values they are. So if you look at the digital partnerships that we have across the world, Japan, Republic of Korea, Canada, Singapore, and India is not called digital partnership, but to a large extent, it works like a digital partnership. You will see that we are working very closely with the most tech advanced countries and those where there is a certain level of values alignment, which the ambassador also mentioned. We have a country of 1.4 billion people that are highly digitized with a very fast tech uptake. We have 500 million people that are connected with their AI and payment system. We have a country that is able to produce 99% of its own smartphone needs, and in the second largest smartphone producer in the world, and where a number of companies are moving from other countries in the region. So that is why we're choosing India. But I really don't want to elude your question. Obviously, there is a geopolitical element. As you said, both the launch of the TTC and the relaunch of the free trade agreement predate the last American election. But there is indeed a geopolitical context that is to be taken into account. There is also a Chinese element. I had the luck of spending COVID times in Beijing, as I was posted there, and we all saw what it meant in terms of our chips, for example, in general of all the value chains, of the technological value chains, and what it meant for us to be so much reliant on a single country. And that's why you would have heard President von der Leyen talking about not decoupling. We cannot decouple from China or from any other largest player in the world, but de-risking. And a large part of de-risking is diversification. So in that respect, India really comes to play. So with that said, obviously, we are taking into account the geopolitical context that is more complex than before. But this is not country-specific, person-specific, election-specific. It's a long-term strategy that I think it was a wake-up. The last 5 years, 10 years have been for us a wake-up call in general, especially on the technological front. So we need to, first of all, put our house into order and make sure that we are competitive. You may have read many hundred pages of the Draghi report pointing specifically to technology as a field where Europe needs to be strong in order to be credible worldwide. And second, you may have read our international digital strategy that we published in June last year. We are, and that's exactly the same words that the ambassador used, no country can do this alone. If you want sovereignty, it has to be done collectively with our closest friends. So yes, all of this to say that there are geopolitical concerns in place, but they go well beyond a specific country or a specific leadership. This is something that we are learning to live in a world where we want to be open for business and we want to be assertive in protecting our values and our interests.
Thank you. I think it's an excellent conclusion, but I can see that Soumen Bery is still here. So if we can just maybe have a final word, I will ask each participant to conclude very briefly by suggesting just one concrete, high potential idea or project for cooperation on emerging technologies between India and EU. Just one idea, one project, very briefly. So maybe, Soumen, we can start with you.
Well, let me violate the rules by just saying that on ISET, I think I'm right, Trisha is in the room, she'll confirm that this was initially launched as a cooperation between the national security advisors on the two sides. I don't think that was a particularly helpful anchor for the ISET. So as you look to learning from the ISET, I would say that that's a negative lesson. Now, in terms of high impact ideas, I know you're thinking about as it were, the subject of this, which is essentially tech. I would double down firstly on Horizon as a mechanism, bringing India into it. I imagine India would need to contribute as well. I don't know the details. And second, I think drilling down on a particular impact area, which the one that comes to mind is agriculture, would be, because AI impact is very broad. So I think, so let me just leave it at that. And then let me use this opportunity to exit and to thank IFRI for including me in this. Thank you, Sylvia, and thanks to the panel.
Thank you so much for joining us. Maybe Ambassador Shabazz, if you have one impactful project or idea
We tried to follow the rule and just talk about one because we talked about so many different things, which I think are all equally important because that's a package that makes the strength of the relationship. But he's gone now. But the one I wanted to mention is what's been discussed on DPI, digital public infrastructure, because it was mentioned in a way that the relationship between India and Global South could be based on those tools. But actually, I think we have a lot to do within Europe where we can learn from India. The fact that you can pay like whatever street vendor with your phone in India is something I think should make us all reflect on how fast India has been able to digitalize and how slow we sometimes are when it comes to adopting those tools. And say with AI, as it was mentioned, we have an opportunity to probably like catch up, and everything we can learn from India on that front, I think would be very beneficial. And that's something where probably we can build technologies and India can help us build usages, which I think would be very beneficial for Europe as we're actually working on a lot of those tools ourselves.
Very interesting to reverse the dynamic. Trisha, one idea maybe, or one project.
I do want to underscore the recommendations that were made before me as well. I haven't had to take out my ID or my wallet in India for a really long time for most things. I can go to the airport with just my face. Setting aside, there might be some issues with facial recognition technology, but it is frictionless at the very least. I will put on the table a project that already exists. There's a model for it. And that's something that the EU and India can replicate. And that is around AI capacity building for Global South countries. The US Bureau for Cyberspace and Digital Policy has historically supported some of this work, including, and this is a vested interest, through a project called AI Connect, which I used to run with them for a couple of years, but they withdrew funding for that, unfortunately. And it was a really good project in that there were nearly 300 policymakers from 80 countries that were a part of this. And it set a baseline around what responsible AI development, use, and deployment means. It was grounded in the OECD AI principles, but then also talked about use cases in healthcare, agriculture, climate, education. And so there's already a model that exists that the EU and India can replicate.
Thank you. And Gabriele, final words?
Well, maybe final words. Then I think one thing that sums up, one item that sums up all these aspects is data sets. I think we have a highly specular, but also complementary data sets in the EU and in India. India, large population, EU also overall relatively large, but different uses of technologies, different possible uses for AI for good, for example, health. The ambassador already mentioned that. I think this is a field where, putting together huge data sets like that can really bring benefits, addressing climate change. And all these solutions can be also helpful, not just for our bilateral cooperation, but also, again, for supporting projects in joint projects in third countries. So yeah, I think data sets would be the one.
Thank you all. So I'm now going to open the floor to questions. So first the audience, and please for the online participants, you can also write down your questions and I will read it out. So please introduce yourself first, and also please make your question short so we make sure we can get the maximum of questions. Yeah, please.
Stan Kozon, Capgemini. Trisha, I have a question for you. You mentioned EU infrastructure as a big topic. And I think you said that one aspiration could be that India and EU try and get some independence from the US existing players, which of course is a great ambition. What do you think is a realistic target given investment capacity and political will across EU and India? So that may be also for Gabriele.
Hi, my name is Deepak. My question is at the intersection of technology, defense, sovereignty, and partnership. If European countries, which are buying increasingly hundreds of F-35 platform manufactured by US, I understand part of the supply chain is in Europe, including assembly line. Why don't you ask part ownership of Lockheed Martin? That will increase your sovereignty. Now, my question, related question for Trisha, is that if you have to finance French industrial military complex by buying billions and billions of French fighter jet and engines, why don't you ask some percent of ownership through some sovereign fund of Dassault Aviation? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Vanisha and I'm currently a student. So my question is to Ms. Clara, because I think you mentioned about the Rush conference that took place at AIMS. And you spoke a lot about the people-to-people interaction, which I believe is very important for the future of India-EU relations. And France is really building on that. So my question is, how do you see industry-academia collaboration in this? Because, of course, we have universities collaborating, but if we really want to build people-to-people interaction, as we earlier mentioned, how it has happened with the US in the past 60 years, how can industry and academia collaboration play a role in this? Thank you so much.
Okay, Ambassador, do you want to start with this question on industry-academia collaboration?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's very on point. I actually come from the private sector, so definitely, and that's also what you've said, Mr. Bertoli. The idea that the partnership cannot be built only with institutions, but needs to bring on board companies is, I think, very fundamental to the work we should all do, and we're all doing. So it was interesting. It's interesting because the two students that were discussing on stage, the president and myself, they actually both did a PhD with Safran AI. And I think it was not really with Safran on AI. Now there is Safran AI as a division. And because their universities, both the Indian part and the French part, both had partnerships with Safran already. So I take your point that the way we portrayed the partnerships and agreements was really institutions to institutions. And we had like a separate meetings with like corporates signing agreements together. So definitely that's probably something like, at least from the perspective of how we portray it, should be improved. But it is at the heart of what we're trying to build. And I have to say, I mean, it's a major point of focus for the relationship with India, but it's a major point of focus for France, like innovation policies itself. One of the challenges, and that's more from my former role as a minister, but we're facing is that we have excellent training and research capabilities in universities, but we're still lagging behind when it comes to private companies actually investing in R&D. There's like 1 percentage point of GDP difference between private sector investments in R&D, in research, between France and Germany. And the ability to like break those silos and bring corporates on board when it comes to building science is definitely something we need to continue pushing for. There's been a lot of progress made, but if we do it from the get-go with our partners, I'm pretty sure we can do more. So completely agree with your comment. That makes me reflect on, we're actually going to Japan and Korea with the president in 2 weeks. Maybe I'm going to change a bit the the part on scientific cooperation, so we get companies on board in that session.
Yes. Firstly, on a realistic roadmap for reducing dependency on US AI infrastructure providers, I believe the EU has already laid out some roadmap on that, and then India also has a national data center policy, though that predates AI, on India becoming a processing hub for the region as well. So those policies exist. The issue is those policies still use US providers to implement those recommendations. I believe around 67% of the EU cloud market is US cloud service providers. And then even the sovereign cloud projects that some individual EU countries are implementing. Still, I think there's Netherlands that had one. It's being supported by Stargate, which is a conglomerate of US companies. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. You can have US companies take on an EU character to work with the needs of EU policymakers as well. And so it's like conditional sovereignty, let's put it in that way. And this kind of brings me to my answer to the second question as well. There are some defense contractors currently housed in India, but they're not Indian, that have been able to do this well because they've been operating in the Indian market so well. They have a lot of local content requirements that they're able to take on that character. And Saab is a good example of that. That's a European defense company that is perceived as Indian in India because they've been partnering with the government for so long. The suggestion on part ownership of defense companies is difficult to work with at best, because these are seen as sovereign assets in most countries, and it's unlikely for a recommendation like that to work. Even in a commercial context, a lot of German robotics companies, for example, are now owned by China. That didn't seem like a problem at first, and now it's seen as a problem.
Maybe Ambassador, if you want to react on that?
Yeah, I wanted to react on the cloud discussion because that's also been a topic where I've spent so many hours of my life on. But I do agree. I think it's interesting because obviously the ability, we talk about sovereignty, and we've talked about sovereignty on that roundtable around the idea of building our own capacity. But with sovereignty, there's also a need to protect our data. And regarding extraterritorial legislation, this has been a topic of utmost importance for Europe. The way we've addressed it in France, and that sometimes is difficult to explain and difficult to comprehend, I completely understand, is exactly what you say. It's not about building everything ourselves, but it's about engaging companies in a way that is going to respect our sovereignty criteria and security criteria. So when we worked on this topic over the course of the last few years, we partnered with our cyber agency to kind of build a framework of data security, which is called Secondum Cloud, so security cloud. And then we engaged American companies to work with us on building a local offering which would actually respect those criteria. And we have Google with Sans and Microsoft with Bleu, who've engaged into those projects, building joint ventures with our own companies, so with Thales and Orange. And this, we think, is a really good way to kind of combine the need for a country for its most sensitive data to be protected, but they need to do that with partners and remain attractive as a international player on the tech scene. So sometimes it's a bit like difficult to explain because on the one hand, people would say, oh, like you're closing doors. On the other hand, people would say, oh, you're doing sovereignty with US companies. Is that real sovereignty? But this framework is, I think, a way we found to kind of combine both attractivity and collaboration, but also security. And this is something we've pushed at European level, but we're not going to go into this discussion for so long because for those companies to operate, there needs to be a market, and for instance, too small of a market. So we think there is a need to take this European-wide, but that's probably like a very long discussion that we don't want to have today.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Gabriele, if you have a comment on the two first questions, and then we'll take a last round of questions.
Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, we're talking about sovereignty. I think there's a difference between self-sufficiency and sovereignty. I don't think we can be self-sufficient objectively. What we can be, though, is essential. I can tell you that in the fields where it matters, where we have strong companies that are key for the global value chains in technology, semiconductors, 5G, cables, then we have a seat at the table, always. When we don't, then we don't necessarily have a seat at the table. So what we're doing what we've been doing in the last few years is a complex putting together legislation and investments. So the CHIPS Act, the AI Act, the development of AI factories and AI continent, what we're doing on cybersecurity, what we will be doing on cloud that is gonna come in the next few months, what we have done on digital platforms. All of that builds up to the fact that we want to protect our values and our interests. At the same time, I think really the main issue is when you are strong, you are credible. And in the fields where we really are strong, we totally have a seat at the table. This doesn't mean that we need to become protectionist. I think the EU has built this, its strengths also on the fact of being an open market and also a market where the rules are clear and set for everyone. So that is something that I don't think we necessarily need to change. We want to be a credible partner where really all the companies that come here know that there are sets of rules. Some of them they may not like, but they apply to all in all member states in a uniform way that is easy to understand and easy to apply.
Okay, I have many questions coming on the chat, but maybe if we have more questions in the audience first. Okay, we have 2 questions here. 3, 4. Okay, let's take maybe 3 questions here and no, okay. So 1 here.
Hi, my name is Tom. I'm from France and I work in New York now. I have a question about how do you think AI is impacting now India and the industry of entertainment specifically? How do you see the AI Act, what we have, thank God, adopted in Europe, influencing your own regulation, especially about copyright law and the impact of entertainment? Because the entertainment industry in India is way bigger, I think, than in the US. How do you think that you are going to be regulating this? And also, what are the solutions for you in order to protect the creators from the threat of AI tomorrow and today as well? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Manas Pawar. I'm from Bombay, India, former Gateway House and a student at Sciences Po. Yesterday, I happened to attend this event where Mr. Cookies, former Federal Minister of Finance of Germany, was presenting this report on financing innovative ventures in Europe. It's an excellent read if anyone's interested. And he happened to touch up a lot upon Europe's dependencies on America on venture capital. He was talking about like AWS, Microsoft, they account for 70% of European cloud market. And EU laws and regulations, like you mentioned, the AI Act, EU chemicals regulation, REACH, biotech regulations, etc., are actually not helping European tech innovation, especially the smaller firms, the smaller startup firms that are trying to come up because they don't necessarily have the money to afford fancy lawyers and meet these regulations set by the EU. So this sort of regulatory barriers. This report states that it is affecting the startup and innovation systems in Europe, and this sort of American dependency is going to be American dependencies along with legal fragmentation and regulatory barriers are going to create a problem. So, what's your take on it?
Thank you. And we have one more question from Laura.
Yes, thank you for this fascinating discussion. I'm Laura Roussy-Rochegon. I head the Geopolitics of Technology Center here at IFRI. I wanted to ask you maybe about the obstacles, because you mentioned bits of them during your discussion, but what are the major points of disagreement? I'm thinking here of differentiated approaches towards Russia, for instance, but also towards global governance of AI, because I don't think that India and France or EU share the same perspective on how AI not only should be regulated from the European perspective, but also more globally speaking. So I don't want to be a troublemaker, but what are the problems in this partnership that works well, as Gabriele said? Thank you.
Okay, and your question is very similar to one of the online participants, so I'm going to read it. Is there a challenge to India, France, and India-EU tech cooperation as a result of India's long-standing defense technology ties to Russia, especially the BrahMos collaboration, and the sensitivity, possible blur, and competition between national French level versus EU level policymaking on tech cooperation? So I think we stop here for this round of questions. Okay, Trisha, maybe on regulation and on this question of the India-Russia proximity.
All right, that was a lot of questions. All right, so I'll start with the influence of the EU AI Act in India. India has gone back and forth a lot on AI regulation until 2024, I want to say. It looked like the Ministry of Electronics and IT was working towards a dedicated regulation for artificial intelligence modeled on the EU AI Act. And there were consultations with industry, with civil society organizations on a Digital India Act that would include AI regulation. That's either stagnant or the Indian government has changed its perspective on whether it needs a dedicated act on AI regulation. And I suspect the US's about turn on AI regulation is a part of that, because the US has moved towards more pro-innovation rather than a regulatory approach. India has also kind of taken a pause to try to figure out what its approach should be that makes sense for Indian companies and the Indian market. And I can say this because I'm not in the Indian government. And then specifically on copyright, right now, most of the issues around AI and copyright are either being fought in the Indian courts, or there's some thoughts on specifying how the Indian Copyright Act applies to AI, but there isn't much happening on that front. I do think that protecting artists and the entertainment industry is a shared interest across the entertainment industries of Europe, India, and the world, but I don't see much happening on that front, unfortunately. On India and Russia, yes, India needs to reduce its dependency on Russia in energy, in defense as well. It is happening. It's slow, but it is happening. Part of it is because India still uses a lot of Soviet-era Russian equipment that continues to require upkeep, and so a continued relationship with Russia. But the Ministry of Defense has undertaken procurement reform to make these shifts easier. But as with many things in bureaucracy, it's moving slowly, but it's happening. And then quickly on whether Europe and India do actually align on AI regulation, I would actually love to hear my co-panelists' perspectives on what the current European perspective on AI regulation is, because I don't know if there is a unified take at the European level on this question.
Yes, on 2 points. First, I'm happy that you took the most difficult question, so I will not add to that. But there is an element of challenge that goes beyond the geopolitical issues, and that's the pace of our cooperation. You are dealing here with two very complex systems. One on the EU side, obviously we're not a country, we have member states. We also have many departments just within the Commission, so it's a complex machine. And the Indian system is equally, if sometimes even more complex. So to put this together and achieve concrete results, sometimes just by bureaucratically has shown some complexities that we are trying to address. On regulation, a lot of companies complain, yes, but how would it be if instead of having a digital platform regulation at European level or an AI Act, they had 27? That's something that, is not often discussed, but that's the alternative. So at the same time, we do understand that some of our regulation has been created some issues and difficulties, especially for the SMEs and for the startups. So in this mandate, under the leadership of President von der Leyen, we're trying to do what we call simplification packages. So to really look at each and every regulation, including the digital field, and see where there is room to make sure that the EU becomes more business friendly by really cutting red tape as much as possible, and that indeed also includes the digital and data regulation. So it's not easy, but I mean, and also again, our machine is complex. It takes time, and we need to respond quite quickly to new challenges that are coming up. One of these is a strong request for simplification that I believe we are addressing, and I think the responses are coming very fast.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to build on that because I think this is a topic where there's probably not a place in the world where we don't come with talking about EU regulation. And in a way, we've kind of like made ourselves get ourselves into like the arguments that some external players have interest into pushing, which is a little bit schizophrenic. Of course, like there's a ton. I was an entrepreneur. I had to implement GDPR. I still have nightmares about that part of my life. There's a ton. It was a small company. There's a ton of stuff we can do better. But let's not like get the words of the ones who don't have interest in us having regulation just come out of our mouths without like thinking about why and the interest of it. Because as you rightly said, and I think it's very important that you explained that just now, what happens if a company has to go through 27 different countries' regulation? We have examples of that. If you're trying and entering the US as a company, you don't have similar data protection legislation within states. This is what fragmentation is about. So Europe as a 27 unified regulatory market is actually a key advantage for us. And I'm saying that coming from the startup ecosystem and being in favor of simplification. But I think too often we kind of like repeat this idea that like Europe is just about regulation and the AI Act is like whatever disaster. The AI Act is not even implemented. Like it doesn't slow company down. And it's about setting a framework of like, you know, what are the stuff we just don't want AI systems to do because it's too risky. It's about usages. It's not about the technology itself. So I think it's very important in all those conferences that we obviously recognize what we can do better. And I think Europe is doing an amazing job, you know, addressing this issue, but also recognize that being 27 is a strength. We're 450 million people. I know some of our regulation doesn't please some of the companies. I've seen that as a minister when we had to deal with trade deals. That was quite interesting. But, you know, it's 450 million people. I don't think there are a lot of companies who can afford growing internationally without accessing this market. So we also need to kind of revert the way we think about regulation. It's a tool for us that can actually help our market be much stronger.
Thank you all. I think we're now reaching the end of our session. I think we covered a lot in 1 hour and a half, from AI regulation, infrastructure, geopolitical context. So I thank you to all our, I thank all our panelists. I think we can give a round of applause.